And the first one of those, I will invite to the stage without further ado, is Professor Björn-Ola Linnér from Mistra Geopolitics at Linköping University, and he will talk on the topic of climate and geopolitical trade disruption, opportunities and risks for Europe. Please, Björn-Ola, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and it's great to see you all here and to be part of this celebration. So, geopolitics, in the broadest sense, refers to how transnational politics interacts with geographical factors like land control and cooperation over land resources, cyberspace, trade flows and trade routes, digital space, and so on. When we started the program about a little more than 8 years ago now, so this is really the final stretch for the program. So we go out to the bank here in Brussels. I always had to explain what geopolitics is, and now I did it anyway. Although I understood from the introduction, most people are now aware of what geopolitics is. That says something of what happened over these 8 years. So there has been at least a threefold of international coverage on geopolitical aspects. Is the sound kind of echoing?
Yeah. Let's try to put it a little bit further up and see.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Even I was annoyed. So it was for you guys. Okay, so the threefold of the international coverage on just in geopolitics, and the fivefold of the research that over these 8 years only. And if you just look at the attention on geopolitics and climate and other sustainability issues, it's even a greater development. Okay, so now to kick off this fantastic seminar with my distinguished colleagues, I will just offer a few perspectives on this relationship between geopolitics, climate, and trade. So this is a map that we are used to seeing. This is showing the impacts of climate change on vulnerable countries around the world. It's from the Notre Dame Adaptation Index. This is developed by some of my colleagues at the Mistra Geopolitics program, working at SEI, has taken this and said this is a common view of vulnerability to climate change. But if we add trade to this image, it becomes very good. There we go. It's then. Okay, so the effect was lost, but I'll do it again. So we can see, for instance, for Europe, I promise not to move around here, so you have to use this one. We can see for Europe that it's definitely much more exposed to climate change. And in a globally warming world, we can see how trade creates new vulnerabilities, but also new resilience, which is also important to bear in mind. But now we'll talk about sort of the more detrimental effects for a while, when we come to the cooperation later on. And in a globally warming world, of course, there are those who take advantage of the increased vulnerability due to trade. And trade in agriculture is one of sort of the trade has made us less vulnerable to extreme weather affecting famine and so on. But that can also be used in the future to exert greater influence geopolitically. And we know from research in a program that has analyzed Russian strategies in this area that already throughout this century, it has been an outspoken strategy by Vladimir Putin to increase the geopolitical influence as he expects that Russia will be a winner in food production due to global warming, for instance. But there is another concept in the geopolitical studies called geopolitical distance. So if we can measure how close the countries are, how close they align with each other internationally when it comes to the UN, in the work of the UN and elsewhere, and our researchers trying to track this. How can we see if they align or are more distant from each other when it comes to geopolitical interest? We can see that those who are closer aligned in geopolitical interest, they also trade more with each other. So for instance, when China and the US, when we could see that their relationships become sort of they become more geopolitical, have more geopolitical tensions between the countries. We can also see the trade go down. And the latest developments this last weeks has surely illustrated that. But there are research on this even before this happened, showing that if it's sort of the alignment decreases by a factor of 10, then at least 2% decrease in trade. So we know that these are these effects. But what we also can see over the last years is that we have seen a proliferation of trade-related climate measures, which take new trade agreements, tariffs, procurements, emergence of supply chain resilient trade corridors, and then also, of course, the carbon border adjustment, which the EU is first with now, but you can see similar development in the UK, which are pretty advanced in their planning and preparation for the potential CBAM, and also discussions in many countries which are closely aligned to the EU. So there is this alignment that we can also anticipate that in the near future, the climate change ambitions will factor into if countries see each other as geopolitically more aligned or not. And that also then, if this research holds, will also then increase the likelihood of trade between these countries. And there's another factor. I will fast forward to some of the factors here in the introduction that I think are critically important for the European ambitions on the climate area and sustainability overall. For some of the trade geopolitical implications, but also related to this and impacting the geopolitics of sustainability for Europe is the tendency that we've seen that the sense of uncertainty, the worry, the existential feeling of uncertainty that has increased dramatically all over the world. Most pronounced, of course, in poorer countries, but we can also see it in middle and high-income countries. And this is data that was presented at the 30-year curriculum of the Human Development Report, which focuses on new geopolitical and development challenges in the age of artificial intelligence. And I thought I'd share some of that with you, because I think that it's super interesting to think about our prospects and constantly what the connection between these three areas: trade, climate, and geopolitics. So the support for the worry has increased. The support for democracy has only marginally increased, from a little bit more than 9% to a little bit below 9% in the UNDP data. But the support for leaders who might undermine democracy, authoritarian leaders, that has skyrocketed. So they call it the democracy pirates. Still, people want democracy, but the appreciation for an authoritarian leader that might dismantle democracy has increased significantly. And this we can see in low-income countries. If you feel secure, then you have a low support for these authoritarian leaders. Then if you feel insecure, it rises. Not so surprisingly. More surprisingly, at least for me, was that this tendency, this difference, was more pronounced in middle-income countries and most pronounced in high-income countries. Which is something that we have to bear in mind, because this uncertainty that can create a challenge then to the transformative ambitions that the European has, and that is at the heart of the 2030 agenda. But it can also create an opportunity. I will close with that remark soon. Because the transformative ambitions that are enshrined in a lot of the international organizations, I know that not everybody in the EU is clings to this word, but it is societal transformation towards decarbonization, towards sustainable development, is a concept that is really spreading in international politics and is sort of an overarching ambition. I was part of the transformative change assessment that the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services had the last 3 years, where we went over assessed, I think it was 7,000 references and 400 cases. So it's quite a lot of research that goes into this. And I spare you reading the 1,000 report document that will be published in the spring. By this conclusion, that it captures it all, Transformative change is necessary, it's urgent, it's challenging, but it's possible. I won't talk so much about transformation, my colleagues will do that, but it is possible, and that connects to the uncertainty, and it connects to the days that we are in, just this couple of weeks, that we really have seen a disruption, and we have seen so many disruptions in the last 10 years. I think that partly explains the surging interest in geopolitics. So with the pandemics, with the first Trump era, pandemics, and then recessions, and then we have the war on Ukraine and other wars around the world, and now another policy shock in many ways. But the interesting thing is that we really don't know how to navigate transformative change globally. This is something that there is a lot of research now, and it will be very interesting to follow. But I would say that the research is not conclusive. But there are a few conclusions. It is possible. So that was the conclusions from papers. And there are examples of that. But navigate that on a global scale. We don't know how it can be done, but we know from history that disruptive events create windows of opportunity for such transformation. Doesn't always happen in transformation, and these disruptive events could be a war, a pandemic, a revolution, a policy shock, or similar. But we know it can happen, it can be captured. And it's time to wrap up. So here is my wrap up. We know that trade can have some negative impacts on climate change. But we also know from the last Trump period, and there's also research on this, that there could be positive effects. Where last time Trump imposed tariffs, even if not on this scale, we could see that front runners were doubling down, both in China and the EU. We could see that catalyzed green transformation. We could also see what's called friendshoring, that is aligned to this geopolitical aligned countries team up and for clean tech. And what is worrying though is that we might well see this transformation unfold. I'm pretty sure it's quite unstoppable in the richer countries, the well-to-do, those who have the technological and economic muscles for it. But what I'm a little bit afraid of from a geopolitical point of view is that we are now heading towards a new bipolar world, not characterized by communism and capitalism, but by those who can transform to sustainability and those that remain in the carbon lock-in. Thank you.
Thank you.